Welcome to History Respawned. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. Today's episode considers Never Alone, the award-winning indie game based on Iñupiaq folklore. Never Alone tells the story of a girl named Nuna as she searches for the origins of a blizzard that is threatening her village. Our guest on today's show is Ishmael Hope, who is a writer and storyteller from Juneau, Alaska, and one of the featured experts in Never Alone's Cultural Insight videos. Ishmael, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much.
So, this is actually the first time that I've interviewed somebody that has actually been a part of the development of the game. So I was wondering if you could take some time and kind of describe how you became involved with this project.
I was the lead writer, and really that means that I worked most closely with creative director Sean Vesey at Eline Media. And we kind of co-wrote that script, and I would actually call a third co-writer the actual storyteller, Robert Cleveland Kunuk-Sayuka, who told the story of Kunuk-Sayuka. And so I helped the team shape and find that narrative and work with it, and basically throughout the process, and then a lot of what I wrote ended up being in the game and spoken by James Nagayak, the Iñupiaq narrator, in the language. And so it was both writing the actual dialogue, but also just conceiving and just imagining when it's a complete blank slate. How do we make it happen? And so that was my role. And how I got started was really as a cultural person, as a writer. A lot of times as Native people, we get denied creative and intellectual agency, and it can be very unconscious. And I think how that can play out is with a thing like this. The people may give the agency, the ability, and the ability to discern and to make choices and to intellectually think something through and to be self-conscious and conscious of something. The media often gives that to the video game developers. And so they say, well, the Iñupiaq culture want to preserve their culture, and so they shared their culture with the team that has the actual intellectual and creative agency. And as we know, when you dig deeper into the game, it was nothing of that sort. We had the team that it was a very deep and close collaboration, and part of what I was able to offer was that choice making, that intellectual and creative ability to just think through how to make a video game work, and how to do it where at every step it reflects the vitality of the voices of our elders.
Yeah, I think that really comes through, and it really feels as though this is something that the Cook Inlet Tribal Council kind of directed themselves. I was wondering, to what extent did the Tribal Council pursue video games as a medium, as a way to tell their stories?
Well, I would say that what really allowed this kind of equal collaboration is a lot of times when you have a collaboration with a non-mainstream group, an indigenous group, a group of people of color or marginalized group, when they're trying to tell their story and they're in collaboration with people, often there will be an unspoken barrier where you can only go so far. And otherwise, it pretty much needs to meet at every level what people expect and what they already think they know about how the stories of the other are told.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we really needed to do was establish that equal creative partnership. And what was amazing was that Cook Inlet Tribal Council, they were the ones that created this team, really, that came forward. Gloria O'Neill, the president and CEO of CITC, it was her vision to want to do something innovative, and her interest in doing something kind of cutting edge, but that still celebrates the people. that it's an amazing business practice. It's also just amazing and healing for our communities. So she was looking with her board, with the organization of CITC. They were really looking for something. And it just happened to be that telling their story, telling a tribal story, aligned the best with working with a video game. It aligned the best with their goals. And so that helped so much, because they were the ones that had the money. They came forward with the idea and with the vision, and they had to approve, along with the leaders at Eline Media. That there was a process where they had to approve and green light every stage, every milestone is what it's called. And I think that's incredible, because you can often say that you have an equal collaboration, but it may not actually, most times that doesn't actually happen. Most times it's just only enough is done to show that there's been some kind of interaction and collaboration. And so rather than just the couple days spent with Native people, sort of ethnographic field trip, and you come back and then they do whatever they want. I mean, that very easily could have been a model, even without the field trip. I mean, there's some other video games. I think all the video games that outside of this particular one didn't even have that field trip. They just had, people, who knows if they even read a book, and who knows even if that book was good. And so that's the level of superficiality that you have almost across the board with almost all media.
Yep.
Whenever they're working with any kind of Native content. And this was just a different story. And I think it starts with examining the power relationships. That's important. We shouldn't fear talking about power. And then when the power is equal, that creates the best opportunity for that equal collaboration.
And I think that really comes across in this game. Like you said, with so many other borrowings of Native American culture in games or other media, it usually comes off as pastiche. It's ridiculous. But this game, it feels very genuine, and I think that's what makes it so compelling. And I think what's really interesting to me is the decision to go with video games, because I really feel that this game is very strong with the way that it tells the story, and it's a game that seems to draw a lot out of the Native culture and the way it tells stories using not only narration but also visuals and sounds, and it seems like that kind of tradition of storytelling really lends itself to video games. So I was wondering, Ishmael, if you could tell me a little bit about the kind of Iñupiaq tradition of storytelling, how they tell stories, why they tell stories, and how do you think that works with this game?
What you have in the stories is it's non-Aristotelian. Mm-hmm. And so we're so used to that form, that very particular Western form is so pervasive. It's as if people think that's universal, and anything slightly outside that is very hard for people to sort of grasp. And so it runs its own path, that maybe crosses over to the familiar, but then goes into something that's its own framework. And so we really tried to think about what the spirit and character of the people and of our stories are. And it's really about the people sitting down or laying down in the benches of a katagi, the community house. And maybe there's a very, maybe there's not even any fire, it's in darkness maybe at nighttime. And they're listening to the stories. They're taken so clearly into a vision. They talk about how you can taste and you can touch and you can feel, and you're following the mind's eye of the elder as they're telling the story. that's a kind of spirit that I wanted to convey somehow, and that I talked with Sean Vesey and talked with the team constantly about, and that's the kind of thing that I'd hope to carry across throughout the gameplay. As we talk with the design team, of course, let them do their thing, but also try to share a little bit about what that is, and let them do their own research where they trying to find it on their own, and they were incredibly successful that way. But so it was really about trying to understand that structure, and to try to you just need time with it, to just let that kind of story structure, that story world sink in. And so we read the direct voices of the elders, not something that's adapted or rewritten or Disneyfied or Brothers Grimmified. It was direct from the elder, a direct translation, and so we read aloud those stories, which really, there are so many of those stories, so many of those storytellers are among the highest achievement of any body of literature that you'll find anywhere in the world. And when people have their Shakespeare and their James Joyce, they kind of find that hard to believe. They kind of entertain you for a little bit when you tell them, but when you really take the time to respect that intellectual achievement that the elders provided, you'll be absolutely blown away and amazed. And that's what the team experienced. They experienced that profound depth and beauty of the stories. And we weren't really able to actually go so completely deep into it. We were able to, what was important for us was we got to make a playable, fun, exciting game, and that's totally okay. But just do it with a hint of that breath of the elder's voice, where the integrity is so deep, that even just that hint, hopefully people will feel and experience. A lot of that comes from the directly quoting the elder, in this case that Robert Cleveland, and having it in the language, spoken in the language. So even if you don't know the language, you get a sense, it just impacts you. You don't even know why. It's all those different textures. And then just the sound, wonderful team, and just Dima Veryavka, the art direction. They really took the time to create that mood and character and to understand it, so that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, the art style in particular stood out to me, particularly because it seemed to adapt so much from the art form Scrimshaw.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell us, to what extent is it used in storytelling in Iñupiaq culture? Is it something that's very common, or is it something that is used on its own without any sort of narration?
I have a feeling that people kind of referenced the Scrimshaw with the bone carving. Not Ron Brower tells us not the whale baleen. That's more for tourists, is what he says. So they kind of use it as a reference point. So they would just kind of point to different parts. But at the same time, I think it was more common that they just kind of told the story. There's other games that people tell and do with. They have a story knife, which is particularly popular with young people in Iñupiaq. So that's another Inuit group, a little more southwestern. So they have, it's like they have a game, or string games where they tell stories with the string games. Very complicated maneuvers with strings, with their feet and their toes and their fingers and their hands. Very complex, where there's a story that goes with the string illuminations that they're doing. I'm not completely familiar with all that, but I know that, they did illustrate their stories a little bit, but it seemed like the majority of storytelling was just direct storytelling.
I think the most interesting story element, at least for me, was the importance of weather in the story. And, I think this is kind of a story element that a lot of, gamers, regardless of their background, can relate to, given the fact that the story is kind of driven by this environmental disaster, right? There's this huge blizzard that strikes Nuna's village, and she has to try to find a way to save her village from this environmental disaster. I mean, is this kind of presence of weather? Is it a common element in these types of stories, or is it one that you particularly tried to focus on?
I would say that one of my teachers, Robert Bringhurst, this genius poet and translator of many of the world classics, including Haida, Native American Haida stories. He's one of my mentors. I think he describes it really well, that Native American mythology doesn't explore the nature of people, the nature of people's relationship to nature, the nature of people, relationship to each other or to God. They explore the relationship of nature to nature. And that's part of its internal structure, where it's a whole other worldview, where it's like the stories come directly out of nature, the language comes out of nature, the spirit and actual, in some way, the cellular bonding and the physical properties of nature creeps into the language and creeps into the stories, and the consciousness of nature comes out most clearly in those old stories told in the native language. And I think that's a concept that's so clear to native elders, but it takes maybe us raised in Western culture a lifetime to try to understand.
Sure, yeah.
But that's what's amazing about that little story. It's a little, illumination, flowering of the consciousness of weather. It is embodied by a man that's creating this blizzard, and that's weather personified. And so they need to go and resolve what that situation is, and through the telling of that story over and over and over again, people I think get a sense of the consciousness of the land where they live in. They learn how to be more directly at home where they are. And so I think that even though it's a simple story, and Robert Cleveland actually could have gone, he told stories that went on for days, hours and hours and hours. But this was a 3-pager or a 15-minute story, which is just a little haiku of a Iñupiaq story that worked for us because it was had on many levels something profound to say. It was told by one of the very greatest storytellers ever, but it was also something that we knew that could be playable because it was relatively simple and direct and straightforward. It was an achievable goal to go after and get something, take it back.
Despite the story's brevity, there's quite a bit of nuance in it. I mean, for instance, taking weather as kind of not only the game's antagonist, but also as a protagonist. I mean, there's parts of the game where Nuna is struggling with the blizzard, with the wind, but then there's other times where the wind actually aids her in her quest. And similarly, the polar bear in the story goes from being a character that is seen as villainous to one that is somewhat sympathetic. Particularly, I remember, I think probably my favorite part of the game is being stranded on ice and how the polar bear deals with that, as well as as Nuna. And I just love that there's so many different angles to the story.
So you have much of the media I love that they're paying attention to. I don't want to be too critical, but you have much of the media who looks at these things and they're stuck in what they think they already know about native cultures and Iñupiaq culture and Eskimo culture. And so a lot of what this was painted as is man versus the harsh, unforgiving terrain of nature, which is such a Western concept. I mean, nature is absolutely alive to us and vibrant and beautiful, and it could be very ambivalent, which means at times it could be harsh and unforgiving, yes, but it could also be tremendously giving and nurturing and nourishing, and you could feel tangibly its consciousness that you're not alone when you're out there. And so that's something that we talked about a lot, actually, because I think some of the team initially wanted to just have it be versus nature. We're just fighting it. And I'm incredibly pleased that the team worked on those moments where there's not only take and push and pull, but give.
Yes.
And so we talked about in many ways that the weather and the land, that's a whole other character. It's its own larger, omnipresent, immense, mysterious, but very tangible character. Mm. I appreciate that you got that, because so even if we make it come through as clear as we think it is, we still get, it still passes people by,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, if you play through the game, it's very hard not to get that. And I think, players that I've talked to, friends that have played the game, they also really appreciate the cultural insight videos, and especially how those are not simply something that you have to go through the menus to get to, but are also presented to you as options to watch while you're playing the game, which I think is a really clever decision. Was that one that that was a conscious decision on the part of the developers, or was it something that came about while the development was going on?
It was during the development. I really credit Sean Vesey for leading that, and Amy Fredine for finding all these cultural ambassadors who can really make it happen. I think it was a discovery that the team made. They were looking for something to go deeper, because a lot of what we came up with was we want to share our culture. We want to make a captivating video game first, but we also knew that we wanted to find opportunities to give a little more depth and breadth. And I didn't know how to resolve that, so I had almost nothing to do with figuring that out and deciding it. So it was really Sean, and it was really CITC and Amy Fredine for putting that together.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've got one more question for you, and this game has been praised by the gaming community for being unique, original. It's won a number of awards. But how have people, particularly those involved with the tribal council, how have people in the community, how have they received this game? Do you think that this game has made an impact on them? Do you think that they see video games as a potential medium to tell more stories?
Yeah, well, I think in some cases people can be naturally skeptical because they've been burned so many times, and some concern and worry about mass media marketing. How much are they going to miss our culture, and how much, and all that. So it was always so important to us that, and something I'd personally try to drive to the team constantly, is that the voice, the beauty of the elders, and their vision, their framework. That's it. When we had a complete blank slate, I knew what the framework the elders were, and I just had to try to communicate that. And it wasn't just me; it was all these cultural ambassadors who were able to communicate that as well. But I really tried to drive that, as that's a framework that completely aligns with a game that we can be proud of, a fun, playable game, something that could make money, which is nothing to sniff at because they had to put millions of dollars in this. Not like a AAA game, but I mean they had to put their hard-earned money in this, and to make the money back, and then hopefully even more so. I felt that the voice of the elders totally aligned with all those goals, and I think it's playing out. I think it connects to people. It feels people want to have some some breath of fresh air and warmth and generosity and vitality in their experiences, and that includes video games. So I think we found that, and I think for me the most successful thing is that it's been embraced by the Iñupiaq elders. They go "Araga," which is fine. That feels so fine, And then many of my most respected elders have done that, where they respond so well, and they don't just respond, verbally, and which means the world to me. But many of them have been involved as cultural ambassadors and involved in the actual creation of the game. And so their support is the success, because otherwise they'd be quiet. They wouldn't call us back. They wouldn't support us. They wouldn't be involved if they weren't behind what we're doing. And so it's them giving themselves to us, and us trying to in turn honor those elders' voices. I think that has created the whole framework for a quality video game that we wanted to make.
I hope it leads to more games. I mean, I know you keep saying that this is such a small story. I'm interested in seeing more tales adapted. Maybe not just for video games, but elsewhere. And I really, I hope this is not the culmination, but just the beginning of this type of work.
Well, they have started the World Games Initiative. That's something that was launched by Gloria O'Neill, Michael Angst, Alan Gershenfeld. So that's the thing that they're currently looking at, where they're talking. Of course, you have to, a lot of things need to fall in place to make it happen. You have to have people that are willing to commit that money and their organization to work with you. But there's some very promising things. The one that was announced publicly was Hawaiian, but I do know, though I have to take their lead when it gets announced. But I do know that there's some very promising other kinds of conversations that are happening as well. So yeah, that's everyone's hope too, is to make more of these and to try new things. Maybe we lean very heavily on the narrative on this one. Maybe you have less narrative and more design and mechanics that still reflect native ways of knowing. I don't know. Maybe you have more narrative, but you have different ways to kind of show how to do it. So we want to experiment and try some new things that we feel can be successful.
Well, Ishmael, I think that's all the time we have, but thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks so much.